Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Today we're checking out the brand new Astra Modulation Machine from Universal Audio. Let's get started. We've got big news for you today. Universal Audio has launched a new family of boutique products called UA-FX. And I've got the first of these here with me today, the Astra Modulation Machine. As you can see, it's a stomp box, one of three that Universal Audio has introduced, along with the Starlight Delay and the Golden Reverberator. We'll be chatting with Tor Mogensen and James Santiago from Universal Audio a bit later about the journey of creating Astra, but clearly the focus here was on making the absolutely most accurate, no-compromise recreations of vintage modulation effects possible. But also, they wanted to keep the pedal simple, clean, and easy to operate, whether you're on stage or in the studio. We've got three classic effects that come standard in the Astra: recreations of the Boss CE1 chorus, the MXR Flanger Doubler, and the tube tremolo effect from a vintage 1965 Fender Deluxe amp. And when you register the pedal with Universal Audio, you get two more bonus effects for free: an MXR Phase 90 and a gorgeous Harmonic Tremolo. Now, one thing I want to make sure that we talk about is that these aren't simply UAD plugins that have been repackaged into a stomp box format. Universal Audio went all the way back to the beginning. They started from scratch and designed a completely new, super powerful quad processor-based hardware platform that allows for incredible possibilities. Then they took nearly 2 years and researched and developed the models for these different effects. They went incredibly deep, from finding the absolute best-sounding vintage units to model to recreating all the quirks in the originals. They even sought out the best tubes and the best tube circuits to put around the different models so that they sound more authentic when you connect your guitar. And they considered things like the line voltage from the wall outlet and even more. Now, the Astra pedal offers stereo in and stereo out jacks, and you can use it in mono to stereo, or in true stereo operation. The jacks auto-detect how you have it connected. You just plug the cables in, and it'll adjust the routing automatically for stereo or for mono operation. You have relay-based true bypass and analog dry-through, so your dry signal never gets converted to digital. It remains completely in the analog domain. It's never touched. You can operate Astra using the front panel controls, or you can save one preset and instantly recall it with the second foot switch. There's some extras here as well, including a Bluetooth pairing button on the back as well as a USB port. So we can expect and honestly hope that there will be future developments to come as well. It's very exciting. But despite all that power, Astra's very easy to use. You have speed, depth, and intensity controls for adjusting the modulation effect across the top of the front panel. The shade control adjusts output for the chorus and tremolo effects, and it adjusts the wet-dry mix for the flanger. For the phaser, that control adjusts the harmonic content, and for the harmonic tremolo, it adjusts the dynamic trigger level. The shape switch adjusts the manual time for the flanger and dynamic speed for the harmonic tremolo. It's inactive on the other effects types since they wouldn't use that control. The two-position mode switch here on this side of the pedal is really interesting, and it really takes advantage of all that processing power inside Astra. For most of the effects, one mode is a classic stereo setup with the dry signal on one side and the wet signal on the other side. But the other mode actually puts the pedal into true dual mono, where you have completely independent effects on each side, which gives you a really wide, rich sound. It's very lush. The two-position toggle switch on this side chooses between chorus and vibrato for the CE1, between flanger and doubler for the flanger, between sine and square wave shapes for the tube tremolo. And with the Phase 90, you get script and block logo variations. There are also two different harmonic trem modes when you're using that effect. You move among the different effects types using the final toggle switch on this side. The LED tells you which effect is loaded. But that's enough talking for now. Let's listen to the effects. Let's take a tour of the sounds in the Astra. There's a lot of possibilities here. Now, first of all, we move through the different types of algorithms or different types of sounds using this switch here in the middle. So we can go from chorus brigade to the flanger doubler to the Trem 65 to when the light turns green. We're now on the Phase 90 that you get when you register the pedal, and this would be the Dharma Trim or the Harmonic Trem as well. And then we can pop back to our chorus here. The center switch is where we save, so we only need to hit that switch if we're going to save a second sound to the preset button here. And the third switch gives us two different options for the sounds, as we'll see. So first up we have the Chorus Brigade, which is based on the chorus ensemble, the CE1 from Boss. It was introduced in 1976. Basically it was a circuitry that came out of a jazz chorus amplifier put into a pedal, one of the first pedals that Boss came out with. So the way this is set up is we can get both of the sounds that are in the original chorus ensemble. We can get the chorus sound and we can also get the vibrato sound. When we're doing the chorus, only this knob is actually active. And it sets the intensity for the chorus sound. So if this is our dry signal, turn the pedal on. Now what's happening here is you're hearing that in stereo. On one side we have the modulation effect, the other side is actually dry. So listen to that again. Here's the wet sound only on one side. Now here's the dry sound on the other side. We adjust the intensity of the chorus by simply turning the intensity knob. A nice feature is the shade control gives us control over the level of the chorus. Sometimes when you step on a chorus, the level drops back a little bit, so we can adjust that. At 12 o'clock, like I have it here, we're basically at unity gain. There are also two different stereo modes for the chorus brigade. In mode 1 here, which is what we're hearing, we have the wet and the dry, as I showed you just a minute ago. When we go to the second position on the mode switch, we now have two chorus brigades, one on each side. It's a very lush sound. And back to the original stereo effect. Our second position of this switch gives us a vibrato effect from the chorus brigade. Now in this case, these two knobs are active, the speed and the depth. We have two different modes here as well for stereo. And back to the original. Again, in this mode, when you step on a vibrato, the volume can sometimes drop down, so we can adjust that using the shade control. The shape control isn't used when you're using the chorus brigade because there were no parameters for it to adjust, so you can set that wherever you like, doesn't matter. There are a lot of beautiful chorus and vibrato sounds available there. Now let's step down to the Flanger Doubler sound. Now this is based on the rack mount Flanger Doubler that MXR produced in the 70s. Of course, MXR well known for stomp boxes, but they made some studio gear in the 70s as well, and the Flanger Doubler was one of those effects. And it had some unique features, such as being able to invert the flange effect. As you'd expect with a flanger, we have speed, we have depth, and we have intensity, which is regeneration or feedback that intensifies the effect. But the critical thing to work with here is the shape control, which gives us the manual setting that was on the original Flanger Doubler. That manual setting was the delay time that created the flange effect. So this sets the delay time, creating the flange effect, and as we move that, you'll hear different timbres. And then the speed adjusts how fast that delay time is modulated, and depth adjusts how far that delay time is modulated. So we have a lot of control for shaping the sound. We have two positions for the mode switch as well. In this case, it's not a stereo setting. In this case, we have normal flanging. When we turn the mode switch up to the second position, we get inverted flanging, and we'll listen to that. So here's our standard flange sound. Bring up the intensity, a little more depth. As we turn down the delay time, our shade control is our mix control for the flanger effect. Now if we invert by turning the mode control, what you're doing is flipping the flange effect 180 degrees out of polarity. It's a very different sound, a very hollow sound. The second effect under this setting is the doubling effect, which is a very short delay. And back to our flanger. And again, anytime we have a setting that we like, we simply hold down the switch, the green light flashes, and it's now saved under this second preset. The last of the effects that comes stock in the Astra pedal is the Trem 65, which is based on the tremolo circuit in a Fender Blackface Deluxe amplifier from 1965. In this case, we have speed, we have intensity, we have deep, which changes the waveform a bit. Again, we have a volume control so that if the tremolo drops down in a level, you can bring that back up using this control. In this case, the shape control is not used. Our mode switch moves us between dual mono and stereo. And this switch moves us between a sine wave and a square wave. So we have two different options there. So let's put that switch up. We'll go here. We'll set ourselves to unity gain. This is not used. Now we'll bring up deep. So you can hear it's changing the shape of that waveform as it's modulating the effect. Now let's go from sine wave to square wave. Now we can switch from dual mono to stereo. It's actually panning back and forth, which is a very cool effect. When you register the Astra pedal, you get two more sounds. The first is a phase 90. This again is a very straight ahead effect. We really only have a speed control in the original pedal, so that's this knob here. These two knobs aren't used, so we can turn those down. Doesn't matter. The shade control becomes an input drive control, so we can actually push this a little bit harder. Or we can lighten up the input for a cleaner sound. And we can go between the original script logo version and the block logo version that came out a few years later. Now again, we can go between dual mono, which is what you're hearing now, and stereo, where we have a separate phase 90 on each the right and the left. Click this toggle again, and now we have the Dharma Trim, which you also get when you register the pedal. Now this is a harmonic tremolo effect, and it's a very interesting effect. It doesn't work like a regular tremolo effect where you're pulsing the volume. Rather, the signal is split using high-pass and low-pass filters to a high component and a low component. And then the modulation moves you between those two components. So it almost gives you a phase shifter kind of an effect. It almost gives you a trem effect. It's a unique sound. So we've got frequency or speed here. we've got depth, and then we've got cutoff, which changes the frequency between the high and the low pass filter. Again, we have two modes, dual mono and stereo. There's a slightly different version here. Almost more like a phase shifter. Now the shade control and the shape control are very interesting here. It's actually a dynamic effect that senses the level of the signal, how hard you're playing your guitar, and adjusts the effect accordingly. So if we set this up with our threshold and our shape control turned up, we'll set a slow speed here with light picking. Now if we pick harder, and you can hear as the note trails off, that dynamic effect brings us back down to the slower setting again. Let's turn that back to 12, turn this off. Now adjusting the intensity control allows us to get a variety of different effects. If we turn that down, we get something that's a little closer to a univibe. Bring it up. And we get something that's a little bit more like a tremolo, because again, we're changing the place where that panning back and forth between the two different frequency ranges takes place. There are lots of different sounds available just with that Dharma Trim setting. When you combine all 5 of those different algorithms together, you have a ton of different modulation sounds you can get out of the Astra pedal. As you can tell, Astra is super versatile and super powerful. It can cover a ton of ground. It contains the most authentic recreations of these classic vintage effects that I've heard in a stomp box. They're really amazing. To learn more about how Universal Audio created these effects, let's bring in James Santiago and Tor Mogensen from Universal Audio. So we're joined now by James Santiago and Tor Mogensen from Universal Audio, and these guys are kind of the brain trust behind these two pedals. I mean, I'm a pedal guy and I'm deep into this stuff, but these guys put me to shame. I mean, every time I talk to them, I learn so much. It's so cool. So we're so excited to have them join us today and tell us about the Astra pedal, because there's a lot of background that goes into this pedal, and I want these guys to tell us the story. So great to have you guys here.
Thanks so much for having us. This is always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys.
No, it's awesome. I'm here to pick your brain, Mitch. I want to pick you. You can pick Tor and your brain, so I'm just here. I'm here to steal all your stuff. So.
Well, that'll take 1 minute with me, so that's going to be a short, a short session. So the Astra pedal, man, I've been playing with it. It does amazing things, and one of the things that really impresses me about it is, you know, everyone tries to model the pedals and model the sounds and make them as accurate as possible, but you guys go to, let's just say, obscene lengths to get these things right. Tell us a little bit about what the thought process and how you go about creating these amazing sounds.
That's pretty much what we stand for. It's just this crazy attention to detail overall, and this sort of no compromise attitude when it comes to both the hardware and the algorithms, the software. For this pedal and the algorithms that are inside, it's a matter of, you know, really spending the time and treating each individual effect as its own complete algorithm. I think you'll find on certain products where it's more of like the algorithms are sort of more multifunctional, so they can do a bunch of different stuff and you can sort of approximate things. We're not about that. We're all about treating each and every single effect with the sort of the respect it deserves. It's also about, when picking these specific effects, it's not just a matter of sort of looking at a schematic online and saying, okay, so here let's emulate this product, or let's emulate this pedal or this design. It's really as much a matter of finding these golden units and knowing what to look for.
Right.
And then, having the guys, in this case, James, with the golden years and the most insane collection of vintage gear and the knowledge of, why was it made? What was it used for? What are all the little quirks? And then on top of that, having engineers that can actually, take all that information and actually implement it in a way, because there are guitar players. All these guys who actually develop these algorithms are guitar players and bass players, so they know all this stuff already.
Yeah, it just depends on how deep you want to go, because there's stuff that makes sense, and then you just get the insanity level of, like, literally. I'll be completely honest. There's a period where me and our guy, in this case was Ross, where we're hand-picking vintage tubes for the stuff, just to make sure everything is perfect before we even decide, well, is this the right one? Well, we should go back and get some NOS tubes, and I'll even say, we even have variacs, and we know these things perfect, like right 117 on the wall. I mean, it's an insane level of just preparation before we even decide, okay, now let's hands down say which one's the best. And that's before any actual modeling algorithmic work is even done. So luckily we get away with murder when it comes to, hey, I think we need to buy a bunch of these and have a shootout. It's like working in the coolest music store in the world, just going, oh, we have all this gear, and then you get to play with it. Eventually you have to do the work.
Right.
It's fun going down the tone rabbit hole just to find the best Echoplex, the best spring reverb tank out of 20 vintage units. And then you start to figure out, and then I hate to say it too, I have a little black book of friends that I call them, like, dude, what's the best, harmonic tremolo in what year amp and specific amp? And what tube do you drive with? So we all share this little information, and it's fun, honestly, to do this stuff.
Right. So how many, when you're going for the MXR flanger, how many of those do you try to track down? How do you find the golden unit?
I go into my back storage room. That's step one. But then again, at my age, you amass this crap. I hate that I say it that way. We've all bought some of this stuff, and then I asked a couple of friends, like, hey man, I'm not sure mine sounds that good. Can I borrow yours? And you always have to just reset your ears, because sometimes what we thought sounded good maybe isn't the best one, because it's just something we're used to. So I always have to reset myself and go, well, literally it's the hunt. You're on the tone chase gear hunt constantly in this job, in this business. And we have official meetings about trying to manage the unmanageable task of the best tone, because it's very much a personal choice what the best tone is. So a lot of times you find one that you think sounds great, and it's maybe because one you're used to, and then I typically find pairs of 3 or 4. So if I think one sounds good, I always base it off of, because, well, here's the other thing. Just because it's never been touched and brand new in the box and is vintage doesn't mean it actually sounded any good. So you have to take the visual and the vintage value of things out of the way and go, well, this may be the rattiest looking deluxe you've ever seen, but inside there's the best sounding spring tank you've ever heard. So you have to just let go of that sort of hearing with your eyes thing, and so we do a lot of blind shootouts, honestly,
right?
Just to make sure this is the best one. And I think this is pretty common in any guitar player that chases tone. Is you're always searching, well, if this one's really good, there must be a better one. And at some point, we have to make a product at the end of all of that. So
right. So is it the case with things like that you modeled for the Astra? Those are solid state devices, the chorus and the flanger and things. Is there as much variability in those looking back at vintage units as there is, say, with an Echoplex or with a tube-driven device?
A lot of these things have a 20% tolerance of parts. So it's like, well, maybe the resistor is pretty close to that value, but then you take 20% of that part times all the other parts being 20%, and then you realize, oh, absolutely, there's going to be a variance in all of this. And then, even funny enough, when we got to the tremolo in ours, we did actually do the tube circuit, so then that made it even more variable, because you can't remove, and even the spring reverb and the other pedals, we have to include the tube circuit. So we ended up going down a bigger rabbit hole, going, well, to make it sound really good, you have to add in all these other parts of the circuit that you didn't think made any difference, like the impact of what is the wall voltage coming in, what is the rectifier tube doing, and it's an insane level of stuff. But luckily, as Tor was saying, we You get to work with engineers who love a challenge and love to go, well, let me figure out why that makes a difference. And then we go down that rabbit hole and come out with something that in the end just sounds right because of all those little details.
Right, right. So how did you choose which units to include when you're creating the algorithms? How did you decide a chorus, the MXR flanger, the harmonic tremolo?
So I think for these pedals, and for all three pedals actually, the overall idea was to just add a few choice algorithms. So first of all, what are the modulation effects that you absolutely need? And second of all, when you think of those effects, chorus, flanger, tremolo, what are like the classic sounds that you just sort of automatically, guitar players automatically associate with these effects? And that's sort of been like that was sort of the mindset to go from. So James and I are basically talking about, so what's the classic chorus? What's the classic tremolo? And from there, it almost was a no-brainer in the case of most of these. I think flanger is actually the toughest one because you can argue that for some guys, it's more the Eddie style flanger. For some guys, it's more like an electric mistress. So that one was probably the toughest one in terms of there's so many different flangers and there's not like a clear winner that everybody just sort of associate with flanging. You might be a Hendrix guy and you just love through zero flanging, for example. Whereas with the chorus and the tremolo and the phaser for that matter, those are the classic units.
Right, right. So there's the software and the algorithm side of it, but there's also the hardware side of it. And these pedals under the hood are really incredible. I mean, there's tons of power in there. And also the way you guys have set up the I/O complement to be able to fit into just about any scenario is really pretty incredible. Talk a little bit about how that figures into the whole process.
Basically, when you do this as product designers, between James and I, you sort of make this long laundry list of things that you'd like to have in the pedals. And then once you do that and you hand it over to engineering and they come back and say, yeah, we pretty much don't have anything that will run the stuff that you're asking for. And that's when you sort of take a deep, long breath and you go like, okay, so is it time to kind of look at what we already have and see if we can shoehorn things in or make compromises? Or you can do what we ended up doing, which is essentially create a whole new platform from scratch, which obviously takes way longer, it's way more complex, and gives you even more gray hair in your beard than you already have. But it's also part of it's part of the fun thing of making products like this, is that you basically get to dream of things, and then there are guys that are way cleverer than you that can actually build them in real life. It's just a ridiculously powerful processor. That's sort of that's the brain of the unit, and it's a brand new one. We've never used it before. There's, no other pedals on the market use anything like that, and it's just ridiculously powerful. And even still with that, we knew we'd get in trouble with some of these algos, and, trust me, we spent a lot of time getting to fit some of these algos in there because they're just so ridiculously complex and detailed in terms of, the emulation. I think if we sort of flip that over and look more on the hardware side in terms of converters and analog circuitry, UA are known for that. We have years and years and years of heritage of creating what are arguably the best audio interfaces in the world. That's an immense benefit, and it makes our lives a little easier. Not to say that there wasn't a lot of work in sort of fitting that whole topology into something that works great for guitars and guitar amps and all that stuff, because, we're a weird bunch and we have very specific requests, and things behave different when you plug them into a 100-watt Marshall cranked all the way up. The philosophy of doing this was really just, make the absolute best pedals that we possibly could, and don't compromise. Just make them as great as they can possibly be.
Right. Right. So how long does it take from conception? Okay, we're going to do a modulation pedal. We're going to call it Astra. But then how long does it take to get to the endpoint where you actually have a finished pedal in your hand?
I started working at UA for 2 years and roughly 3 months ago. And, not saying that engineering got involved at that point, but that's, literally, maybe not on day one, but that's when I started etching out those pedals with James, joining in. So I'd say it's definitely been at least 2 years. And then, I can't honestly remember when engineering really started to get into this, but, it's taken a while. we don't take things lightly, and we don't ship products until we think they're ready to ship. So
James, you have shared some stories with me about tearing some of these things apart and having the guts of pedals and units strewn all over your studio. Share with us something extreme that went into the Astra pedal.
Oh yeah, well, interesting. Well, I will tell you one interesting thing is we ended up putting an extra thing in there, just because we were going down so many little rabbit holes of all these cool sounds, and because, as Tor mentioned, this team all loves new sounds and innovating, and we're all players. You know, one interesting thing that went in there is, you know, when you register this pedal, you get an extra little algorithm, and we ended up with this harmonic tremolo that sort of came out of nowhere, just because we just felt like, man, we've been playing with this, and our guy Ross is like, I really love harmonic tremolos, after he did the regular tremolo we worked on. And he just, on a weekend, he wouldn't let it go. So you figure, you're already working so many hours a week to hit these goals. And it's like, yeah, but I can make the coolest harmonic tremolo. We could do something neat with it. And then you're able to take these vintage circuits, and then what could you do to update them? And then you find out that once you go down those little paths, you sort of have this clear vision of, man, this would be really cool if we could do this. And it's a matter of us getting in a room and talking about, like, well, what if we did this? And like I say, everyone plays, even the most hardcore engineer. So as Tor mentioned too, you could have an engineering meeting about hardware, and we're sitting here with a wall of Marshalls. The engineer has an AP on screen. We're looking at stuff, but he's also got a tune reverb under his desk and cranking things on 10. So you're always balancing, well, is there some tech innovation, but also, does it sound really good when you crank it up and make it distort and do some of this crazy stuff?
Right.
I mean, we could write a book on the insanity of how to listen to gear and what's good and bad, and there's this weird thing that happens. It also happens with some of the other designers there who do some of the pro audio stuff, is you end up becoming an expert in the piece of gear, sometimes more than the manufacturer, because you can manufacture something, but then try to figure out, well, why is this magic, and what did that part do to cause this? Means you have to go read up on bucket-brigade, Reticon, and Panasonic chips. I spent a week looking at bucket-brigade designs on chips from 35 years ago. Why? Because we needed to know where the magic was, and it's an insane level of stuff that we get away with to get to do that.
Wow, that's so awesome. Well, one of the big benefits with a pedal like the Astra and having a team like the two of you behind it is that you're both players. I mean, obviously great musicians yourselves, and you bring that to it. It's not an electrical engineer writing a schematic. You guys are designing from the other end back. Yep. And I think that really shows in the final pedals, because they sound fantastic, and they're so versatile and do so many things so well. So very cool. And thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you sitting down with us and giving us a little background on the Astra pedal. And it's a phenomenal modulation pedal. I know people are going to love it.
Thanks, Mitch.
I hope so, man. Thanks.
Right on. Take care, guys. See you later. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the new Astra Modulation Machine from Universal Audio. It's an incredible sounding stomp box. If you're after authentic recreations of vintage effects with no compromised sound quality, then Astra makes the perfect choice. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click here for more videos like this, or start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.